Okay, a world buff's an exploit. Okay. Here we go. Don't do a PG. Hidden items video? Well, we got like 10 other ones we gotta watch.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Melderon here. Before I get started with this video, I'd like to state that this is obviously an opinion piece. Something that my brother and I pride ourselves on is that we have built a community that digests ideas and discusses
I didn't know that they were
rather than
brothers.
a community that just takes what we say as gospel.
Okay.
We never want to create an echo chamber of thought. Rather, we firmly believe that discourse and freedom of ideas and conversation are of the utmost importance.
Good.
So if you agree or disagree with this opinion, let us know. As long as you are respectful, we will do our best to reply. Also, we'd like to thank Druid Theory Crafter and friend Taladrill for helping us write this script. I realize that the title of this video may seem extreme. However, the reason is simple. Blizzard devs are undertaking the massive task of bringing us classic, and they are being as faithful as they can to make the game as close to original as possible. I applaud their efforts, and they are doing a great job. However, I expect that they are going to make a mistake.
Let me look at all the world buffs here. Attack power increased by 200. Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer. Critical strike chance of spells by 10%? What the fuck? Was it that good? Holy shit, that's ridiculous. I didn't even know that. Fanboying in the background? Yeah, I just want to cool it down a little bit, and then I'll turn it back off. Increases the chance for melee range spell criticals. Actually, I'll just do it after the video. It's fine. This is insane. I didn't even know all the world buffs, and you could put all these together on at the same time?
By implementing world buffs as is. World buffs existed in vanilla and should exist in the game,
right,
with their mechanics and effects unchanged,
right,
but with one exception.
Okay.
World buffs should be removed from players automatically when they zone into a raid instance. This video will explain world buffs' impact on raids, the damage they do to player experience, and why their use, specifically in raids, is the definition of a significant gameplay exploit. We can all agree that vanilla had a lot of unique quirks and oddities. However, things that constitute exploiting the game are not beneficial to the health of the game. I hope that anything found to be something that meets the criteria of an exploit, regardless of its presence in vanilla, would be fixed by the developers for Classic.
Okay.
Before going into the discussion, let's go over what an exploit is. From Wikipedia. In video games, an exploit is the use of a bug or glitches, game system, rates, hitboxes, speed or level design, etc. by a player to their advantage in a manner not intended by the game's designers. Keep this definition in mind when seeing how world buffs affect the user experience.
Well, I think that, all right, so let's before we get into any of this, I want to go ahead and say, guys, these guys make great videos, okay? So even if you disagree with them, let's wait and let's hear out their perspective. And we can talk about it afterwards, all right? Let's just be respectful and listen to what they're going to say. These guys have played vanilla for a long time. They have a very probably nuanced opinion of this that could or could not be influenced by their experience on private servers. And I think that their experience does deserve at least a listen.
You will see that world buffs are an exploit because players utilize the game's system to their advantage to simplify raid encounters. And this behavior was not intended by the original developers.
Okay.
With the understanding of how world buffs could fit the criteria of being an exploit, let's turn to some pros and cons of their presence in the game, and then get into the day-to-day of how they are utilized by the players.
All right.
World buffs add a significant incentive to do world PvP events.
Yeah.
This is probably the biggest pro to keeping world buffs in as is. World buffs are understandably extremely sought after, so it can be incredibly rewarding for a guild to lie in wait to destroy an opposing faction's guild who's about to enter their weekly raid with world buffs. Additionally, with solo PvP play, players such as priests can remove world buffs while lying in wait at raid instances to the same effect. World buffs cause more general world interaction, since you get these in Dire Maw, on Zandalar Island, in Felwood, and even at the Dark Moon Fair, your chances of running across opposing faction players is higher.
Of course.
World buffs provide additional competition for the highest level guilds.
They do.
A wipe will be a guaranteed loss of any chance of competitiveness from that guild
or any member of that
raid team for the week.
Yeah, for speedrunning.
The guilds that do the content without wiping will be the competition.
I want to just say that isn't this a very, very sexist picture? There are no women on here. It's only 5 men competing. This is why we need feminism right here, okay? I gotta take a drink real quick. Okay, I ran out of Dr. Pepper. Okay. How do you know they're men? Shit! Now I'm getting banned. Damn it, man. Delete the VOD afterwards.
In general, world buffs make your character feel a lot stronger, which can be fun for DPS and tanking classes. I think this reason is why there isn't a discussion about this issue. To discuss it is to invite a nerf to yourself, and we all know how important it is to see those big numbers. Am I right?
Everybody loves numbers.
Lastly, world buffs foster a sense of accomplishment. This goes with the mentality that if you work hard, you should be rewarded well. In other words, those that put in the effort and the time to achieve these buffs feel accomplished.
Yeah.
There are likely other pros that people might throw out there, but this hits all of the big points. Now let's move to the cons, where, honestly, there are quite a few. Let's start by rebutting the world PvP point, since people generally care about this aspect the most. World buff PvP action is short-lived and oriented around ganking. It isn't like epic battles in South Shore versus Tarren Mill. One side just wants to get their buffs and then go into the raid, and the other is just looking to stop them.
Man, I can't think of anything like that that's ever happened before. Wow. I mean, I think that, like, really, how do you define organic? And let's talk about this right here, right? How do you define organic? Is organic something that happens because of in-game means? Is organic, like, how is South Shore versus Tarren Mill organic in a way that this is not? I would even maybe argue that this would be even more organic than South Shore versus Tarren Mill, because there is a goal and a win condition that both players have, right? Or both teams have. The win condition is either get to the raid with your buffs or prevent the other team from getting the raid with your buffs. So if anything, I would say that world PvP around world buffs is more organic than South Shore versus Tarren Mill. Because in South Shore versus Tarren Mill, there's no outcome that matters. It's just like it's PvP for the sake of PvP.
One side is victorious, everyone moves on. The opportunity provides the incentive, and destroying a whole raid is fun, but it is not continued organic open world PvP.
Well, how do you define organic?
Talking about PvP and competition, there would be strong incentive towards collusion between guilds and factions to sabotage top performing guilds from doing raids with world buffs, or even for top guilds to keep in check lesser guilds on the same server with planned attacks against these guilds on their raid day.
I don't think that collusion personally is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, like, it's not good, but there's also, like, there's a lot of things that are, like, you know, there's like black and white, you know, there's like things that are bad, things that are good, but there's a lot of gray area in between. And I think that collusion is the gray area. Is collusion necessarily against the rules? It's not against the rules, but it's against the spirit of the game. And I think the spirit of the game is, you know, that's really where you really get into the discussion of collusion. And doing things that are against the spirit of the game, in current WoW, I do think that Blizzard should try to preserve that. But in classic WoW, like outside of, what is it, like Quest Helper add-ons and Group Finder add-ons, I don't think that Blizzard should be as overreaching with trying to preserve the spirit of the game, because everybody also has a different perspective on what that spirit is. Some people think the spirit of the game is being able to troll people with world buffs. Other people think the spirit of the game is being able to do raids with world buffs. So oftentimes the spirit of the game in everybody's mind is very contradictory.
World buffs are a de facto requirement for virtually any quality guild. Even low-level guilds still will put a lot of pressure onto people to get buffs before every raid. Getting world buffs is busy work drudgery that forces people to do the same thing over and over again. While you might say the same about consumables,
yes,
remember that these can be bought with gold, and you can farm gold in many different ways, adding more gameplay variety.
Well, I mean, you still have, like, I mean, for example, like we watched the other video about the Hydraxian Water Awards, right? I mean, the Hydraxian Water Awards, if you're able to, if you're in a guild, like, they're going to require you to do that too. And also, like, let's say the force requirement is still the same with farming consumables. It's just you're either farming consumables directly or indirectly. You still have a forced requirement of a behavior, right? Or of an action that you have to take. You either are farming gold in, let's say, Tyr's Hand, or you are farming the consumables directly. In both circumstances, the ultimate outcome is the same. You are forced into an activity because your guild requires you to perform that activity in order to raid. The way that you receive the items is, in my opinion, irrelevant.
Getting world buffs, you must log off your character so that the buff timers don't go away.
That is
People
stupid.
routinely get buffs the day before the raid, meaning that your main character is inaccessible from anywhere between an hour before the raid to a day or even longer.
Yeah, that is stupid.
This, in my opinion, negatively impacts the game as the world feels more empty. You are missing out on social interactions that may benefit the server as a whole. Since world buffs have such...
That's a good point, and I mean, honestly... It's like, I mean, these are all also like, I mean, the only example here, this is all like PvP server focused stuff anyway, right? And if you really want to be a competitive guild, just play on a PvE server so you can just run over there and get all your buffs and not have to worry about it. That's my perspective, right? Fridge is not open. Shut the fuck up. So anyway, the only thing here that's not a PvP only server problem is number 3. And I think that a lot of people and a lot of guilds are going to play on PvE servers because they don't really care about PvP, right? Yeah, just you guys don't need to be annoying about this stuff, okay? I know that it's not open.
A strong effect.
Okay.
And a raid wipe removes these buffs. High-performing players in non-top tier guilds won't be able to compete directly in standings against those in top guilds. World buffs effectively boost the group as well as the individual, while members of guilds who lack world buffs hinders both the group and the individual. And because of the direct issue in the con above, losing world buffs in raids is the ultimate morale destroyer.
Well, yeah.
The effect of world buffs being lost sours an entire raid night and can happen within the first 5 minutes of the raid. This effect is predictable and extremely unpleasant to be part of. So far I've mentioned 6 cons, and I haven't even gotten to the biggest problem of world buffs. World buffs flat out trivialize content. I'll say that again. World buffs flat out trivialize endgame PvE content.
That's like saying that... It's like, imagine getting in a boxing match with a blind person. World buffs are putting the blindfold on the blind person. It's already trivial. It's already trivial. Like, it's already easy. Like, there's no, like, it's already a joke. That's what I'm saying, right? Not really? Wait, what do you mean not really? How is it already? Yeah, I mean, they're already extremely easy. The world buffs make them easier, yeah, sure, but if you're wiping in the raids, it's probably not, like, I mean, your group sucks one way or another. It's the, yeah, I mean, not false, yeah, I don't think so. He's saying that good gear trivializes content. Well, world buffs have minimal effect on difficulty. I don't know, I mean, I think if you have all of them, it makes them a lot easier, but I mean, if you're a guild that's like getting world buffs, getting all of the world buffs in order to do a raid, your guild's probably already really, really good, and you're going to be able to clear the content anyway. If you're good enough to clear the raid, you deserve the buff. Yeah, exactly. The argument is that world buffs trivialize content. You need a 0 wipe run, which is already trivial for your gear. Well, yeah, I mean, so it doesn't matter. I don't see why it would matter, because you're still getting the same result. You're still clearing it very fast if you have the gear enough to do world buffs and do a speed run in the first place. So it just makes something that's already going to happen fast happen even faster. The toxicity thing, it's like, I mean, anything does that. I mean, you can use that argument for a million different things. Continue the video. Explain how much more powerful you become with all world buffs on. Okay, well, we'll keep going. We'll keep going.
People do so much more damage and get a lot of increased survivability as well.
Okay.
Put that together and you can stomp content way easier, faster, and ignore many of the mechanics because of quick kill times. Stacking world buffs provides between 30 to 60% more total raid damage depending on the class and role. No, I'm not exaggerating.
That's a lot.
And additionally, over a 30% health
That's
pool
a
increase
lot
for the entire raid. Let me reiterate.
Okay.
Depending on the class, world buffs add up to a 60% increase to damage. Having an entire raid with full world buffs increases raid strength to crazy levels. To put this in perspective, this is along the same lines of comparing two players' effectiveness, where one has an optimal DPS build and the other has literally no talent points even assigned. Yes, it is that big of a difference.
That's a lot.
We can see that with this list, while world buffs may add a lot of fun with personal strength and ability, and more world encounters, there are a lot of downsides. Repetitive busy work to get buffs, immediately followed by required downtime in the form of logging off or playing on alts, becomes the norm. Raids with world buffs are easier to the point of trivial for some, but instantly turn toxic when a mistake happens and a wipe removes all of the buffs.
I want to say one thing, okay? I think the entire crux of this argument lies on one thing. Did the developers intend on having world buffs in raids? If they explicitly said we don't want world buffs in raids, then yeah, it's an exploit, right? And then it's a more complicated conversation. But if they never said anything about this, then it should be implied, because of the fact that you'd be able to bring these world buffs into dungeons for like years, right? That it was okay. So we'll see what they said. They removed them for a reason. Well, they removed a lot of things for reasons, but it doesn't mean that whenever they were in the game, they were considered exploits.
All this because of an artificial inflation of hidden flavor due to buffs that were never planned to be all stacked together. Let's take a little tangent to go over what the experience is like for players if world buffs are a thing in Classic. Those of you that haven't been around the private server scene can benefit from seeing how the flow works.
Okay.
You'll start out by taking a flight over to Feralis and then ride over to Dire Maul. Since your guild will often do it around the same time, one or two groups will do a quick tribute run. Once done, everyone there will enter a raid group, and with a cap of 5 people concurrently in the dungeon, one by one people will trickle in, piggybacking off the initial clear to get the buffs and then leave either by Hearth or Port.
That's
if you
so
are acquiring
ridiculous.
these buffs the day before the raid, then you now log that character off until raid day. That's right, you can't play your main character until the actual raid starts. On raid day, or immediately following your Dire Maul buffs, you will go to Stormwind or Orgrimmar and log off. Since the Onyxia and Nefarian heads are on a timer, you'll now have to have a personal or guild-wide scout who will let you know when the buff is going out. By the way, the respawn timer is somewhere between 2 to 8 hours. Once the buff process starts, you'll have less than a minute to quickly log your character in to nab the buff. After getting it, you'll go ahead and log off now, because the last buffs you'll get will be immediately before the raid. Okay, it's almost time to start the raid. Everyone is talking either on Discord or with alts since their mains are logged off, saving buff timers. Once the raid is ready to go, people will log on and quickly make their way to Zandalar Island either by flying, Hearth, or summons. Once there, you get the ZG buff, and then everyone can finally head to the raid. However, some guilds look to get additional buffs. This Fellwood Songflower takes more summons, or the entire raid flying over, and additionally you can also get War Chief's Blessing in Orgrimmar, which is really hard to get consistently.
Oh, come on.
At this point, you're either wearily nodding with the familiarity of it all, or you are shaking your head saying there is no way that people will do this weekly. And you're right.
Yeah, they do.
They will do it twice a week. Never underestimate what people will do to take the easy route in an MMO, and world buffs are a quintessential easy route.
I don't think it's really being an easy route. It's just because it's like most of the guilds that are doing the raids and like getting all the world buffs and everything are probably able to clear the raids without any buffs at all. They just want to be able to do it even faster, right? So I think that once you really put that into perspective, that you're really comparing people clearing content to people clearing content faster, it's a little bit of a different discussion.
Many of you guys are probably saying now, no, I refuse to believe that casual guilds will go through with this. This is a hardcore guild issue only. I'm sorry, but it won't be. We can see how guilds function on private servers to know exactly how this will play out. The requirement for world buffs seeps into every guild, and it's easy to see why. Early on, a guild may say no to world buffs. It's overkill and we don't need them. Life is good. But then one or two raiders gets them anyway, and now top the meters week after week. Now others in the guild want to see what they can do to compete against them, and they also see the strength of the buffs, so they get them too. And on and on and on until those truly casual enough to not care about raid progress at all are the ones not doing it. What's the real motivation for this?
That's actually a really good point, because that happens in like current raids. You know, that is very, very true. So what happens is that if you have something like that, and if there's like one person that takes advantage of it, it kind of creates a soft requirement for everybody else to take advantage of it, or they just get removed. So it's the same thing with, like, let's say artifact power back in Legion. If you had one guy in your guild, let's say you didn't need artifact level 54 to kill like Croesus on Mythic, but you had the other guy, let's say you were two warriors, right? One warrior was level 35, the other warrior was level 54. So both of the warriors could do the damage that you needed to do to kill the boss, but one guy obviously was doing a lot more because he did this other thing. So what are you going to do? You're going to invite the guy that's doing substantially more damage because he put in more work and more effort, and you're going to bring him. That creates a soft expectation on the other guy to level up his artifact weapon or be forever the second choice. And it's like whenever gear drops, who do you think you're going to give the gear to? Are you going to give the gear to the guy that puts in 100% or the guy who puts in 110? So, I mean, this point is actually very valid. And it's a player behavior thing. It's happened many times in current WoW. That ruins your point from before, though. I don't know which point that is. I mean, I've been like I made a number of points.
Leaders? No, it's loot. Top performers have a better chance to get good gear.
There it is.
If you aren't that, then you aren't going to get the best items.
There it is.
If you want the best, you need to compete. And you cannot compete against world buffs, so it's either join or die. The major effect of this is that it is such bad gameplay. Look at all the downtime. Imagine game mechanics where the best way to play the game is to literally log out and not play your actual main character.
Yeah.
But when you play the game that way, it makes you so overpowered that you trivialize the content that you do actually play. If you die, then it ruins your entire night. This is life with world buffs. I honestly believe this is an example of one of the worst gameplay designs in the history of World of Warcraft. Give me flying mounts.
Okay. This guy hasn't played Legion or BFA. To think that he's never played Legion or BFA. That's not true at all. Like, the world buffs idea is... No. It's not even close. It's bad, right? The world buff idea is bad, and he brings up a lot of good points in that regard. But I also don't think that it's really that... Like, well, let's finish the video. Let's go. You have no idea? I mean, you have no idea? I know how Legendary has worked in Legion. That was awful.
God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but even give me LFG. I don't care. It's not as bad as something that penalizes you for wanting to play the game with your main character. Okay, back on topic.
Okay.
This video started by saying that world buffs are an exploit. Bold statement, but hopefully the idea is softening a bit for you now. Let's keep going down this rabbit hole, shall we? We will now dive into a few historical exploits directly from Vanilla WoW, starting with the most infamous one, the Paladin Reckoning Stacking Incident. When this talent came out, there was no limit to the number of stacks you could build up, so someone was clever and spent hours building up hundreds of Reckoning stacks. And then, with his stacks, he went out and one-shot the world boss, Lord Kha'Zix, by himself. Blizzard then hotfixed this issue less than 24 hours later. Here's a fun one, only fixed in patch 1.11, the Nax patch. Directly from the patch notes, instituted an anti-exploit measure on certain encounters, almost entirely raid bosses. These encounters will prevent people from zoning into the instance while that encounter is engaged. If you attempt to zone into the instance while that encounter is engaged, you will be resurrected at the outside entrance. This is primarily to combat graveyard rushing in instances. Before this fix, during Onyxia for example, if you died, you could simply do a corpse run, re-enter the raid, and continue to attack the boss during the same attempt.
Really?
An even more significant exploit for allowing more player chances during a boss fight was out-of-combat rezzing. Back in the day, when your raid attacked a boss, and if you personally didn't do anything, you weren't put in combat. Well, early on, Molten Core was so hard, I mean, we sucked so much, that a common strategy to...
See, that's what Paladins were for. Right, as you had because the Paladins were useless besides that. So they'd spend all their time buffing people and then just rezzing the people that were actually doing the work. And you just had Paladins sitting in the back, sitting there. well, hopefully I'll be able to get some loot this time. I sure hope Lawbringer drops. And then Lawbringer drops and the guild decides it's actually better to just vendor it and take the gold and buy an enchant for a real raider.
Help defeat bosses was to have one or more paladins or shaman stand in the back and not engage and simply wait for someone to die, and then res them, heal them, and let them rejoin the fight.
Yep.
Over and over again. We are so used to knowing that, apart from battle reses, everyone gets one chance to live for each boss fight. It's crazy to think that strategies were based on the opposite. Literally zerg the boss and res and do it again. But
That's what
thankfully
we do.
Blizz fixed it quick. Right?
Well, it's great.
Right? No! This was a problem that plagued MC in Blackwing Lair and only in patch 1.9.3, a month into AQ, and over 2 years
They
after
finally
the game's
figure it
release,
out.
was a fix added to finally put a stop to it. These exploits and many more were all fixed in vanilla. However, that doesn't mean that simply looking at what was fixed in vanilla and what wasn't is a good enough line to draw in the sand. There are many known exploits that people discovered in vanilla. Most were fixed by the time TBC came out, but not all. And some exploits existed in vanilla but weren't discovered until TBC or even in Wrath.
I think the difference between that, like, I don't consider that an exploit. And here's why I don't consider it an exploit. Is because players were not getting suspended or banned for doing it. Exploits in my mind are things that break the terms of service. And if players are not getting suspended or banned for exploits, that means that to some degree, they're not an exploit.
Here's an exploit that will absolutely be fixed in Classic, even though it was one of the ones found in Wrath. Certain items existed that had 100% spell scaling. To explain this quickly, imagine an item that adds 2 fire damage to all of your melee attacks.
Okay.
By equipping gear focused on caster stats, if the gear added, let's say, 300 spell power, then now your melee attacks hit for 302
Oh, people
fire
did this with
damage each
Arcane
attack.
Shot.
Enter the existence of what was dubbed the Fire Rogue. It's simply a rogue who wears a ton of caster gear and is based around Blaze Fury Medallion because that item we imagined is real, and that's how it behaved in vanilla.
Wow.
I say this will not be the case so confidently because this is an exploit. No changes would dictate that this remain at 100% scaling because that's how it was in vanilla. It's even how it was in TBC. However, to be no changes would be to break the very function of the class. A rogue who does twice his normal DPS because he's wearing stuff geared for mages? Not intended. All of these exploits listed are ones that directly affect raids, and I doubt anyone would argue that these mechanics are not exploits or that we should see them in Classic. All of them clearly are beyond how the devs wanted the raid encounters to play out, and yet, world buffs affect a raid far more than any of those exploits put together. Paladin Reckoning stacks, rezzing those that died in battle, and melee being built around a single item is still no comparison to buffs that increase raid-wide DPS by 30 to 60% and increase the entire raid's health pool by over 30%. That, tied to the detriment of gameplay that affects how players play their characters just to accomplish this. World buffs are a game-breaking exploit that can't be allowed to be used in raid instances. One critical issue in talking about exploits is that something isn't an exploit unless someone is using it. It's emergent gameplay that causes these things to surface. For the vast majority of vanilla, world buffs weren't used as they will be today.
Okay.
Is that true, or just hearsay? It's pretty well known that by Nax, or at least by the end of it, the key takeaway for many players was that you needed these things called world buffs to be able to actually kill content. But surely world buffs were known before Nax. Maybe not to the noobs out there, but at least to the top tier raiders. A recent Countdown to Classic interview with Death and Taxes member 1927 on episode number 94 went over this exact issue. His time raiding with his guild spanned AQ progression. While consumable usage happened, the raid never utilized world buffs. The players were even aware of the buffs, as he mentioned using them for PvP. However, they didn't use them in raids. This was one of the...
We used the, like my guild, right? No, it wasn't we. I wasn't in the guild then. I remember very clearly them saying that they used as many world buffs as possible to kill Lotheb in Nax 40. So it did happen in Vanilla WoW, but it might have not only gotten popularized until Nax.
Top guilds in the world on the bleeding edge of content. If they didn't use world buffs, no one did. Here's a brief excerpt.
Yeah, that's what's fun. I hear about guilds that get all the world buffs before going in, and the only time I would really ever remember getting world buffs was for PvP, and to make the highlight video, I collected a few, nothing too crazy. But as a hunter, you were low on the priority for consumables, so that was really not something I ever experienced.
Yeah, nobody cares
much,
about hunters.
but it certainly wasn't as hardcore as the way things are today. And I heard about methods spending like 100 million gold going into debt to get their world first. But yeah, back then things just
what the fuck, dude?
It was a simpler time, and things really hadn't got that competitive yet. So there was no real requirement. But like I said, Death and Taxes was a very try-hard guild, very competitive, so most of the members were engineers. But yeah, nothing, no requirement really as to what your professions were. I think I was leatherworking and skinning just to level up, but that turned out to be a relatively useless profession. But I wanted to make the switch to engineering because
it's better
and stuff like that were just coming into use by the time I was quitting, but I never really did. So no,
sorry about the sound.
Make sure to check out the full interview on CountdownTheClassic.com. It truly was the end of the game where the idea of using world buffs in raids came out. By that point, we know, again, that the devs were already focused on TBC, so the idea that world buffs could trivialize content was an exploit that wasn't worth the devs' time. Casual guilds weren't using it. Only those going after
that's an assumption, right? That I feel like the assumption is that Blizzard intentionally did not change it. Right? I mean, I think that's a very big assumption to make, is that they decided that, we're not going to change it because BC is coming out. Unless there's evidence of that, I don't really see any reason to believe that.
Nax gear were, and Nax was famous for almost no one experiencing the content.
Right.
So who cares? Move on to problems that actually affect players. Okay, but Melderon, everyone says that world buffs are required for Nax. If we don't have world buffs in Classic, then we won't be able to actually beat Nax. No, they aren't. We have learned so much about the game collectively as a community since Vanilla.
Of course
Research
they can beat
continued with private servers.
What do you mean?
Though they have their inherent inaccuracies, it is still no less true that they have been a massive Vanilla WoW sandbox for years. People have optimized almost everything possible within the game. Classic raids will not need world buffs to beat Nax. I can guarantee you that. Many exploits have been found in Vanilla, and plenty were fixed. But some weren't. Exploits aren't always found, and they aren't always fixed. The Paladin Wreck Bomb was solved instantly because it was so broken. Others, like the spell scaling exploits, weren't found, so weren't fixed. When an exploit is fixed, it's fixed because of a combination of severity, ease of access, or frequency of use. We can see that world buffs perfectly fit the criteria of severity.
I don't know how you can say ease of access whenever the first 5 minutes of the video was about how they're not easy to get. I mean, it doesn't really seem like it makes a lot of sense.
Ease of access and frequency of use to be an exploit. It is truly the trifecta of being a game-breaking issue. The effects of world buffs are severe and make challenging encounters easy and easy encounters trivial. Additionally, it imparts a lot of negative emergent gameplay not intended by the original developers. World buffs are extremely easy for people to access. Only the first 5 people in a 40-man raid have to even clear a Dire Maul tribute run. The other 35 can literally just run in the dungeon with no mental thought. The other buffs simply require you to stand in town or on an island. They are able to be used in every single raid. Dire Maul buffs have no cooldown. Dragon Slayer can be activated twice per raid member, giving 40 full weeks of buffs at 2 buffs a week. And ZG can be used once per person, but there's a raid lockout for every 3 days for ZG, also allowing 2 buffs a week. ZG is also extremely easy and popular for alts to run, so there's a never-ending supply of them. If left into the game, we will see the use of world buffs as early as possible and utilized in every single raid unless the issue is fixed. How do we go about fixing it? Easy. World buffs don't need to be removed from the game at all. They provide a fun and interesting aspect to Classic. However, if a player enters a raid instance, these buffs should be removed from the player. All 20 and 40-man raids shouldn't allow for the use of world buffs in any way for completion of the content. Dire Maul, ZG, Ani, and Nefhead, Songflower, and the Darkmoon Fair buffs all should not work in raids. These buffs can still be enjoyed and used in PvP, in soloing, in world content, and in dungeons, but don't break raids with world buffs. The relevant longevity and success of Classic WoW significantly relies on PvE content being as difficult as possible. Thanks for listening to this epic dive in world buffs. Hopefully it was entertaining and might have made you think about the game a little bit differently. You might agree with me, or you might not. It's a hard point to know what the devs would do since world buffs weren't removed in TBC or Wrath. It's just buffs. Buffs can't be an exploit, right? Oh hey, before I leave you, check this out. Patch 2.1.0. Fengus's Fury, Moldar's Moxie, Rallying Cry of the Dragonslayer, Slipkick Savvy, and Spirit of Zandalar. These buffs will no longer work on targets over level 63.
Wouldn't that imply that the buffs were intended to be for players that were level 60, and then those players would be able to do the level 60 raids?
How about that? I guess Blizzard did fix this exploit, after all. Keep on keybinding and grinding, everyone. I hope to see you all in Classic Azeroth.
Okay. So, let's talk about this. What do you guys think? What are the thoughts? Real and true, no changes. Why is he called an exploit? Well, that's the thing, right? Is that the entire idea, right, is based off of the definition of exploit that he used, right? And if the definition of exploit that he's using requires, right, and this is by his own definition, in a manner not intended by the game's designers. Now, the fact that I think that, how do you define intended? Now, in my mind, I would define intended by something that the developers change later on in the future. Now, it's very clear to me that they did intend to have the world buffs allowed in raids. Not only were players using world buffs in raids in Nax Ramas towards the end of vanilla, that was never changed, in the same way that the Kazakh thing was changed, but also the fact that they made this change and it only affects players that are 63 and above implies that there was a clear intent for these buffs to be active on players that were level 60 and below. Right? Intended means planned. Yeah. Does that make sense? In TBC, yeah. Not players. Well, what do you mean not players? Not in raids, though? Where did it say not in raids? Where did Blizzard ever create the distinction between using world buffs in raids versus using them in the open world? Where is this distinction ever created besides in people's heads? I'm curious. It was created in your head. Yeah, you created the distinction in your head. Ask Mark Kern. The thing is that it's more complicated than just asking Mark Kern. Like, there's like hundreds of developers that worked on WoW. I don't know. I don't think it's that simple. Straw pull it? Well, it's not okay, you know what? Targets over level 63 are the raid bosses. No, the buffs, the targets are the players. The buffs goes on the players. The targets are the players. What is wrong with you guys? Come on. Bowman's X, yeah, well, I don't know. A lot of people are saying that. A lot of assumptions in that video. Well, the main assumption, right? Here's the way that I look at it. Is that the main assumption is that Blizzard did not intend on world buffs to be used in raids in vanilla WoW. Nothing that Blizzard has done indicates that. Why 63 and not 60? Because they wanted people to be able to do it probably a few levels above that, right? So it's not like this, the second that you leave level 60, it's not going to work, right? And at the end of the day, who cares, right? And like, even it doesn't matter. Like, the distinction between 60 and 63 is irrelevant. The same discussion is to be had. Wait, camera? Yeah, no bosses. Wrath of the Lich King had buffs, limited time zones, maybe just one. Yeah, I think so. Of course it did. Not that. They didn't intend to stack the buff. When did they say that? When did they say that they didn't intend to buff stacking? When was this ever said? You guys are just making shit up. You're just making shit up. Stop making shit up. Like, they never said this. It was never said. Blizzard never said this was an exploit. That's why it was in the game for the entirety of Vanilla WoW. Melderon with 1,000 bits. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that, man. Thank you for making the video, too. This is a good video. Ask Kevin Jordan. They don't need to say it. Yeah, they don't need to say it because you'll say it for them, right? There it is. Would it be better to wink level 63 with buffs or level 70 with buffs? I don't know. I mean, I think it really just kind of depends. But, yeah, to me, it seems very obvious that... Oh, here's the video, by the way. I'll link it to you guys if you want to watch it. Watch it on your own. There's the video. We'll give it a like. Let's see what people are saying in the comments, okay? On Chronos private servers, yeah, this is what they did on private servers. On private servers, as soon as you loaded into a dungeon or a raid, it would remove... Oh, you raid, actually, I think. A raid, it would remove all of your world buffs. Okay, so what people who use the buffs should just not be credited with the kill. Well, no, I mean, that's up to the player base to decide. I mean, that's not anything that we get to decide or the devs get to decide or not. Like comments, yeah. Let's see. Classic is broken, that's why people love it. That's a pretty good comment, I like that. Let's see, so let's see. On private servers, the world buffs got removed only whenever entering Nax. Well, my understanding was that they got removed for the first month or so, and then after that, you'd be able to take the buffs into the raid, or something like that. I forgot, like, what the specifics were, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, the point is that there were world buff restrictions on private servers that did not exist in the actual game. Right? That's the only thing that matters. All favorited comments? Well, I mean, like... I think, like, I mean, it doesn't matter if you favorite the comments. I'm sure some of these comments, these favoriting, are people disliking, or disagreeing with them. Are consumables exploits as well? Well, obviously, consumables are not exploits. Like, obviously. Imagine buffs actually mattering, except in BFA. Unlike in BFA. Yeah, I know. Like, that was great back whenever they did matter. I got, like, more comments. Asmon reads his entire life. I read a lot of comments, okay? I'll be honest. I do. I read a lot of them. Maybe a stupid question, but does Classic WoW have achievement points? No, it doesn't. Let's see. People on Chronos and private servers voted for it? Well, yeah, but it's not about, like, voting for something in the game, right? I mean, this is, like, Classic WoW is supposed to be a recreation of the original game, not necessarily a, you know, a combination of everything that people have voted on and, you know, wanted to change over time. Let's change things. Yeah, so only WoW for now? Well, I don't know about only WoW, like, on my stream? Yeah, for the near future, yeah. World buffs are LFR with 1 life and good rewards. Yeah, it's about right. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not like the players, and also, like, I think exploits in my mind, right? Exploits are things that if you do them, you get in trouble with Blizzard. And I think that most people would kind of agree on that, is that if you're doing an exploit, that's something that Blizzard can action your account over. I don't know anybody who got their account actioned over doing out-of-combat rezzing in Molten Core. Yeah, I mean, so I think that saying something is like an unintended... Like, there's a difference between unintended gameplay and exploiting. And I think ultimately, like, the word exploiting is probably just a little bit too much of a focus here. The idea, should you allow world buffs and raids? Now, if we want to make the game the same as it used to be, I think we should allow world buffs and raids. That's what makes sense to me. I can see where some people would disagree on that, but that's the way that I look at it. I played so much, saying you can recreate Stormwind on paper? No, I haven't played that much, man.